The night Julian transferred our intimate memories to his first love. She sent me a video on Snapchat. In the video, her face was flushed pink. Nora, Julian is so wild in your memories. My legs are still shaking. My husband, Julian Thorne, was the world's leading pioneer in neurological memory mapping. To cure his severely depressed ex-girlfriend, Summer Brooks, he did the unthinkable. Every single month, he forcefully extracted one of my most precious memories and transferred it into her mind. While he tortured me during the day, he would pull me tightly into his chest late at night, whispering, "Be good, Nora. Just bear with it. Once she's fully cured, I'll take you to travel the world. We have a lifetime to make new memories. I'll love you even more than before." And today was the final session. He wanted to strip away the one memory I refused to let go of. The very moment we first met and fell in love. He arrogantly believed that by turning my mind into a blank slate, he could erase all the trauma he had caused over the years. But what he didn't know was this. 2 weeks ago, I had already booked a one-way ticket to Iceland. Once this final memory was ripped away, I would forget him completely. And then, following the plan in my notes app, I would walk away and never look back. Nora, this is the second to last time. Don't be afraid. I've given you a mild sedative. It won't hurt as much as last time. His voice was deep and soothing. He sounded less like a man stealing my mind, and more like a lover delivering a sacred vow. The moment the machine whirred to life, a sharp, electric current exploded in my skull. My memory of our second anniversary was being violently ripped out of my brain. Julian, it hurt so bad. Panic and agony flashed in Julian's eyes. He pulled me into his arms, holding me in a death grip. "I'm so sorry, baby. I'm right here. I've got you." He held me so tightly I felt like my bones would crack, his eyes bloodshot and watery. Yet, his hand never once reached for the stop button on the machine. That was Julian. He loved me enough to die for me. Yet he was the very one carving me up with a dull scalpel. 10 minutes later, the extraction was complete. I collapsed in his arms, drenched in cold sweat, a gaping void left in my mind. The cold weight of losing something precious made me shiver. Julian gently wiped the trace of blood from my lip, lifted me bridal style, and carried me toward his private penthouse suite on the top floor of the clinic. The moment he pushed open the door, a woman in a white slip dress came running over, stumbling. It was Summer, his first love. "Julian." I suddenly saw the most beautiful fireworks in my head. Did they come from Nora? The tension in Julian's brow instantly melted, replaced by a tender smile. "Summer, go back to your room. You just had a memory transplant. Any extreme excitement could damage your brain." Summer's smile vanished, and tears began to pool in her eyes. "Julian, I'm just so happy. Nora's memories are so warm. I feel like my depression is almost cured." But she suddenly paused, staring directly at me with a chilling intensity. "But Julian, if I could just have the memory of how you two first met, I think I could be completely cured." Summer had always talked about how that was the most beautiful moment she had ever heard of. Julian stiffened slightly, then spoke in a gentle, placating tone. "Don't rush, Summer. Nora's brain can't handle such frequent extractions. We will arrange it in a few days." Lying on the hospital bed, I watched their pathetic little show with cold, detached eyes. My hand slipped into my pocket, gently tracing the edge of the one-way ticket to Iceland. 3 days left. "Julian, you're about to get exactly what you wanted." Back at our villa, Julian showered me with an almost fanatical, desperate affection. He canceled all his prestigious medical conferences, just to watch over me 24/7. But the side effects of the memory extraction were hitting me hard. My nerves felt like they were being pierced by 1,000 needles, and every breath brought a wave of blinding vertigo. I leaned over the bathroom sink, throwing up the bland chicken broth I had just managed to swallow, my stomach cramping violently in cold sweats. Julian held me tight from behind, his eyes bloodshot. Without a shred of disgust, he used his own hands. Hands insured for tens of millions of dollars, hands meant only for holding scalpels, to clean up after me. He gently wiped my face with a warm towel, and peppered the back of my neck with soft, frantic kisses. "I'm so sorry, baby. It's all my fault. You'll feel better now that it's out." His voice was hoarse with pain, his eyes swimming with guilt and desperate tenderness. He lifted me carefully, laid me down on the plush mattress, and knelt by the bedside. He pulled a velvet red box from his pocket. Inside was a flawlessly cut, 10-carat pink diamond ring. "Nora, once Summer is fully recovered, let's have our official wedding, okay?" He kissed my fingertips with religious devotion. "I'll give you the grandest wedding. I want the whole world to know you're the woman I'd die for. Everything I owe you. I'll spend the rest of my life paying you back." Looking at his deeply devoted face, I only felt a wave of visceral disgust rise in my stomach. He arrogantly believed that as long as I was the one who ended up by his side, all the bone-deep pain he had inflicted could be magically erased. "Sure," I whispered, lowering my eyelashes to hide the dead silence in my eyes. I nodded obediently. After all, there were only 2 days left. Julian's eyes lit up instantly. He leaned down to kiss me, but the sudden, frantic ringing of his phone shattered the silence in the bedroom. On the other end, his assistant's voice screamed in absolute panic. "Dr. Thorne, it's an emergency. Miss Brooks just slit her wrists. She smashed the bathroom mirror and cut her artery. There's blood everywhere. She won't let the doctors touch her. She says she'd rather bleed out unless she sees you and gets that first meeting memory right now." Julian bolted upright, the tenderness in his eyes instantly replaced by sheer panic. "Keep her stable. I'm on my way." He grabbed his keys and rushed toward the door, but just as he reached the threshold, he stopped dead in his tracks. He turned around, staring at me with a desperate, pleading look. I leaned against the headboard, watching him quietly. I knew he had to make a choice. Julian strode back to the bed and grabbed my hands, squeezing them so hard they hurt. "Nora, I'm begging you. The memory of when we first met. Let me give it to her now, okay?" The air in the bedroom seemed to vanish instantly. The silence was suffocating. I looked at Julian. I didn't even have the energy to feel angry anymore. This was the man who swore he would die for me. For another woman, he was handing me the blade himself. "You swore just yesterday that you would never cross this line," I said, my voice eerily calm. "I know I'm a bastard. I broke my promise." Julian buried his face in my palms, his shoulders shaking as he sobbed. "But Nora, a life is on the line. I can't just watch her die. And Summer only got this way because of me. She took the impact of that rogue truck years ago. If she hadn't pushed me out of the way, I would have died. We wouldn't even have had the chance to meet. Think of this as helping me pay my debt to her, please." With red eyes, he slammed the heavy shackles of moral guilt onto my neck. This was his way of loving me, using my life to pay his debts to another woman. I looked at him, and the memory he wanted to steal flashed vividly in my mind. I was 18, cornered in a dark alley by a group of thugs. Julian had jumped in like a madman to protect me, taking a knife to the shoulder. His white shirt was soaked in blood. Under the falling cherry blossoms, he had clutched his wound and smiled at me. "Don't cry. I'll protect you from now on." That was my most sacred, untouched treasure. Once, I would have died before letting anyone take it from me. "Besides, you won't remember anything after the extraction," Julian urged desperately. "We'll start fresh. Your head will only be filled with our happy memories from now on. Just say yes, and I'll transfer all my shares in Thorne Group to you. My life is yours." I stared at his tortured, pleading face. Suddenly, I smiled. Actually, this was for the best. Since I was leaving anyway, carrying these memories would only make the rest of my life long and miserable. Leaving with a clean slate would be my ultimate release. "Fine. I'll do it," I said, pulling my hands away coldly. "Extract all of it. Don't leave a single trace." Julian froze, as if unable to believe I had agreed so easily. Wild ecstasy instantly flooded his face. He wrapped his arms around me, pulling me into a suffocating embrace. "Nora, thank you. I swear as soon as this is over, we are getting married." I didn't pull away. I let him hold me like a doll. The doors to the ER swung open. Summer lay on the white bed. Her wrist slashed so deep the bone almost showed, blood dripping onto the floor. The moment she saw Julian, her lifeless eyes sparked with triumph. "Julian, you came?" Julian rushed over, his hands desperately pressing down on her bleeding wrist, his voice thick with agony. "Summer, are you insane? Who gave you permission to die? If you die, no matter how successful I become, my conscience will haunt me to my grave." Julian's hands shook so violently he could barely staunch the bleeding, his white shirt quickly turning crimson. Summer smiled weakly, tears mixing with cold sweat. She deliberately looked past Julian's shoulder, locking eyes with me as I stood by the door. "Julian, I really can't take it anymore. The depression is too painful. Maybe only Nora's memory can save me. If you won't give it to me, that's fine. I'll just give you my life. That way, I can be with you forever." Every word was a calculated gamble. Summer was too clever. She knew that by ripping away the deepest foundation of our love, she would leave me as an empty, emotionless shell. Who would be left to compete with her then? I watched their dramatic little show. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. Instead, a faint, cold smile touched my lips. This toxic, rotten relationship would be the last piece of trash I threw away before boarding my flight. In the private or the surgical lights were blinding. Julian personally helped me into the hospital gown. He couldn't bring himself to look me in the eye. He just kept his head down, his hands trembling as he attached the electrodes to my forehead. "Go to sleep, Nora. When you wake up, we'll both be free. We'll start over." As he held the syringe filled with the heavy sedative, his hands shook uncontrollably. I looked at him, finding the sight almost pathetic. "Julian," I called out softly. He froze, his red, bloodshot eyes finally meeting mine. I offered him the most tender, peaceful smile I had given him in 5 years. "I hope you get exactly what you want." The cold anesthetic flowed into my vein. A blinding white light instantly shattered my senses, tearing through my nerves like a rusty saw. The 18-year-old Nora Sinclair, who fell in love with Julian Thorne under the cherry blossoms, was being violently erased, along with every ounce of love she had carried for him all these years. Flashes of Julian's face flickered before my eyes. Him covered in blood to protect me, him clumsily cooking soup in the kitchen, him pinning me against the glass of the Ferris wheel for a deep kiss. In that blinding white light, they all shattered like a broken mirror, dissolving into ash. The pain was so intense my organs felt like they were cramping. I felt like I was bleeding from every sensory organ. Beep. Dr. Thorne, the patient's brainwaves are flatlining. Her heart rate is dropping rapidly. Julian's terrified roar echoed through the operating room. Push epinephrine. Keep going, do not stop the extraction. He stared at the progress bar on the monitor, his eyes wild and bloodshot. With a final ding, the extraction reached 100%. The most precious memory I owned was completely gone. My body convulsed violently on the table, and the heart monitor stretched into a long, flat line. Beep. The long, agonizing sound of death filled the room. Nora. Julian threw himself onto my chest, performing CPR frantically. I don't give you permission to die. Wake up. Fight it. He grabbed the defibrillator, shocking my chest over and over again. I don't know how much time passed. With a dull thud on the monitor, my heart sputtered back to life. I had been dragged back from the gates of hell. At the exact same moment, a nurse's excited voice came from the adjacent room. Miss Brooks's transplant was a success. It was finally over. Julian spent the entire night in Summer's room. When the sun began to rise, he pushed open my door once more. Nora, I'm going to get that lobster bisque you love from the French bistro downtown. Wait for me. He pressed a gentle kiss to my forehead and walked out of the room, his eyes full of hope. The moment the door clicked shut, I slowly opened my eyes. My mind was a vast, echoing blank. I had no idea who he was. But I remembered my name was Nora Sinclair. And I remembered the escape plan detailed in my notes app. I pulled the 4-needle out of my hand and walked calmly to the closet. Inside was my backpack, a fake passport under the name Audrey Cole, and a one-way ticket to Iceland. I threw on a black trench coat, tossed the hospital gown into the trash, and walked out of the room. Goodbye, the past. Goodbye, Nora Sinclair. The winter morning air in the city smelled of wet asphalt and approaching frost. Julian Thorne stepped out of the luxury French bistro on 5th Avenue, holding an insulated thermal bag containing fresh lobster bisque. The soup was made from Nora's favorite recipe, light cream, a hint of tarragon and sweet Atlantic. Lobster meat simmered for 6 hours. For the first time in 18 months, the suffocating knot in Julian's chest had loosened. He climbed into his Maybach, tapping his fingers against the steering wheel to the rhythm of a classical piano piece on the radio. His reflection in the rearview mirror showed dark circles beneath his eyes, but his gaze was electric. With manic hope. It's done, he thought, his heart hammering against his ribs with giddy momentum. The debt is paid. Summer will live and Nora is safe. In his mind, he had already scripted the next 10 years. He would take Nora to the private clinic in the Swiss Alps for neurological recovery. He would buy the seaside villa in Amalfi she had once circled in an architectural magazine. He would kneel before her on a terrace overlooking the Mediterranean, slide the 10-carat pink diamond onto her ring finger, and reintroduce himself. Hello, my name is Julian Thorne, and I am going to spend the rest of my life making you fall in love with me. He believed, with the supreme arrogance of a world-renowned neuroscientist, that love was merely a sequence of neurochemical imprints. If he had built the neural pathways once, he could build them again, stronger, purer, unmarred by the ghosts of his past. At 7:15 a.m., his car pulled into the underground garage of the Thorne Neurological Institute. Julian took the private executive elevator straight to the top floor. The steel doors slid open with a soft chime. He walked down the carpeted corridor, holding the warm bag of soup, a gentle practice smile playing on his lips. Nora, he called out softly, pushing open the heavy oak door of Suite 101. Baby, I'm back. The soup is still hot. The words died in his throat. The suite was empty. The crisp white hospital bed was unmade, the linen sheets thrown back. In the center of the mattress lay a small, dark red stain where an intravenous line had been torn from a vein. The 4 poles stood beside the bed, the plastic tube dripping clear saline onto the polished floorboards with a slow, rhythmic drip, drip, drip. Julian's smile froze. The thermal bag slipped from his fingers, hitting the floor with a dull thud. Hot, fragrant bisque leaked through the seams, staining his polished leather shoes. Nora. His voice was barely a whisper. He checked the en-suite bathroom. Empty. The marble counter was bare. The water glass had been neatly placed in the drying rack. He rushed to the walk-in closet. The hospital gown was crumpled inside the stainless steel trash can. Her clothes, the simple cashmere sweater, the black trench coat, the flat walking boots she had worn when she checked into the clinic 3 days ago, were gone. On the bedside nightstand, resting dead center on the glass surface, was the red velvet box containing the 10-carat pink diamond ring. Beneath the box lay a folded sheet of clinic stationery. Julian's hands shook so violently he could barely open the paper. His vision blurred as his eyes scanned the single line typed in crisp, black ink. Patient 001 extraction status, complete. Memory residue, 0%. Target identity, null. There was no angry letter. No tears. No accusations of betrayal. She had not left a single word for him because she no longer knew who he was. No, 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 no. Julian roared, tearing out of the room his white coat, billowing behind him like broken wings. Security. Lock down the facility. Lock down every exit. Within 3 minutes, the security monitoring center on the subterranean level of the institute was in total chaos. Julian stood behind the head of security, his knuckles white as he leaned over the console, his eyes bloodshot, veins bulging along his neck. Rewind camera 12. Julian barked, his voice cracking with hysteria. Show me the North Service stairwell. Now. The operator's fingers clattered across the mechanical keyboard. The multi-angle surveillance feeds rewound, showing digital timestamps rolling backward. From 7:15 to 6:20 a.m. At 6:22 a.m., the door to Suite 101 swung open on the corridor camera. A woman stepped out. She wore a long black trench coat, a charcoal scarf wrapped loosely around her neck, and a simple black backpack slung over one shoulder. Her hair was pulled back into a neat, low ponytail. Julian leaned in until his nose nearly touched the high-resolution monitor. Nora. The camera captured her face beneath the corridor's LED panels. There was no confusion in her expression. No disinis. No hesitation. Her skin was pale from the 3-hour extraction and subsequent cardiac arrest, but her posture was straight, balanced, and composed. She pulled a pair of dark sunglasses from her coat pocket, slipped them on, and walked toward the emergency stairwell with measured, steady strides. She didn't look back at the room. She didn't look at the framed portraits of Julian's medical achievements lining the wall. At the bottom of the stairwell, she exited through the fire door into the back alley, stepped into a waiting yellow taxi that had been hailed via a prepaid anonymous app, and disappeared into the morning commuter traffic. Traced the license plate. Julian screamed, slamming his fist onto the acrylic control panel with enough force to spiderweb the glass. Call the city transport authority. Get the traffic feed on 8th Avenue. Find out where that cab went. Dr. Thorne, his chief assistant, David, stammered from the doorway, holding an emergency tablet. The airport transit authority. We just ran a cross-check on her domestic social security registry. Miss Sinclair's credit cards, her phone line, her bank accounts. They were all formally closed 48 hours ago. Julian whirled around, grabbing David by the lapels of his scrubs, lifting the younger man nearly off his feet. What do you mean closed? She was under sedation. She was on the operating table. She scheduled the account closures 2 weeks in advance, sir, David gasped, terrified by the feral, murderous look in Julian's eyes. The automated execution triggered the moment her primary device registered an offline status. For more than 24 hours, she liquidated everything. Every dollar. Every digital footprint. Julian's grip went slack. David stumbled back against the wall, coughing. 2 weeks ago. The realization slammed into Julian's chest like a freight train. 2 weeks ago was when he had first knelt by her bedside, holding her hands, swearing that this would be the final extraction. 2 weeks ago was when she had looked at him with those quiet, compliant dark eyes and whispered, "Okay, Julian, if it will make you happy." She hadn't yielded to his emotional blackmail. She hadn't surrendered out of love. She had used his own medical protocol against him. She had waited for him to surgically remove every link, every emotional chain, and every memory that tethered her to his existence, so she could walk out of his life without leaving a single ghost behind. Julian. A soft, breathy voice echoed from the hallway. Julian turned slowly. Summer Brooks stood in the doorway of the monitoring room, wearing a silk dressing gown. Her wrist was heavily bandaged, but her face was glowing with an unnatural, feverish radiance. Her eyes sparkled with a strange, intoxicating light as she looked at him. "Julian," Summer whispered, taking a step toward him, her lips curving into a tender, intimate smile. "I just woke up, and I remember the cherry blossoms. I remember you bleeding through your white shirt in that dark alley, smiling at me, telling me not to cry." She reached out her delicate, uninjured hand, gently touching Julian's cheek. "You really loved me that much, didn't you, Julian? You took a knife for me when we were 18. Julian stared at her, hearing those sacred, untouchable words. The words Nora had whispered against his throat on the night he proposed. The memory of his own teenage blood spilled on cold gravel to protect the only innocent thing in his life, coming out of Summer's mouth made his stomach heave with violent, visceral revulsion. He didn't feel warmth. He didn't feel relief. He felt as though someone had dug up a sacred grave, desecrated the corpse, and dressed the rotten bones in stolen silk. With a sudden, violent jerk, Julian slapped Summer's hand away from his face. "Don't touch me," Julian hissed, his voice trembling with pure venom. Summer froze, her eyes widening in shock. "Julian? What's wrong? This is our memory. You gave it to me. You cured me. Get away from me," Julian rasped, backing away from her as if she were a venomous reptile. "That was never your memory. That was Nora's. That was Nora's. The human brain is not a computer hard drive. It is a biological tapestry of 86 billion neurons, woven together by pain, chemistry, and personal consequence." By midnight of the second day, Summer Brooks learned this truth in the most agonizing way imaginable. In the master suite of Julian's penthouse, Summer sat in front of the vanity mirror, brushing her long chestnut hair. The silver-plated brush trembled in her grip. "Why isn't he here?" she thought, staring at her reflection. "I have all her memories now. I remember how he likes his coffee. 2 drops of raw honey, no dairy. I remember where his surgical scars are. I know how to make him sigh when he touches my waist. Why is he sleeping in his research office?" Suddenly, a sharp, blinding spike of pain shot through the center of her prefrontal cortex. Summer dropped the brush. It clattered against the glass perfume bottles, shattering an antique crystal vial of rose water. She clutched her temples, her fingernails digging into her scalp. The vision that flashed behind her eyes was not the romantic cherry blossom alley. It was a sterile, blinding operating room. She felt the cold, oily bite of stainless steel electrodes clamped to her skull. She felt the horrific, searing agony of an electric current ripping through her neural synapses, tearing living memories from her gray matter like flesh being flayed from bone. "Julian, it hurts so bad." Summer heard Nora's voice echoing inside her own throat. The phantom pain was so overwhelming that her stomach convulsed. She collapsed off the vanity stool, vomiting violently onto the Persian rug. Cold sweat poured down her neck. Her heart raced to 160 beats per minute. With the stolen memories of love came the physiological trauma of the extractions. Every single time Julian had strapped Nora to that table, every single time Nora had bitten her lip until it bled while Julian whispered hollow promises of just bear with it, baby. Every wave of nausea, every flash of blinding vertigo, and every ounce of silent, suffocating despair Nora had swallowed over the past 18 months. They were all chemically encoded into the neural grafts. "No, stop it. Get out of my head," Summer screamed, thrashing on the floor, clawing at her own forehead. She crawled toward the door, dragging her heavy, trembling limbs across the hallway, pounding on the heavy mahogany door of Julian's private study. "Julian, help me. The machine is killing me. It hurts. My brain is burning." The study door clicked open. Julian stood in the darkness, illuminated only by the pale blue light of 3 computer monitors behind him. He looked terrible. His hair was greasy and unkempt, his eyes sunken into dark purple hollows, his designer shirt wrinkled and stained with coffee. On the 3 monitors behind him, high-resolution security footage from international airport terminals was looping continuously. He looked down at Summer sobbing on the floorboards, clutching her head, her face twisted in identical agony to the way Nora had looked 48 hours earlier. Julian's face remained completely dead. "That's the neurorejection syndrome, Summer," Julian said, his voice flat, dry, and hollowed out of all human emotion. "Foreign emotional tissue produces systemic synaptic inflammation. I wrote a paper on it 5 years ago." Summer gasped, looking up at him through a curtain of sweaty hair. "Then give me the blocker. Reverse the graft. Extract them back out." Julian crouched down slowly, his dark eyes staring directly into hers with chilling, scientific detachment. "I can't," he whispered. "Why not? You're the world's leading pioneer. You built the machine." "Because the neural pathways have already fused with your native cortex," Julian said, a terrifying, humorless smile touching the corner of his lips. "To extract those memories now would require lobotomizing 40% of your frontal lobe. You would spend the rest of your life in an adult diaper, unable to speak or feed yourself." Summer's breath caught in her throat. She stared at him in paralyzed horror. "You wanted her life, didn't you?" Julian whispered, his fingers gently brushing a strand of wet hair from her forehead, a gesture devoid of warmth, like a coroner inspecting a specimen. "You wanted the way I looked at her. You wanted the love that made me bleed in that alley." He leaned closer, his breath cold against her ear. "Now you have it, Summer. You have every single second of the torture I put her through. Live with it." Julian stood up, stepped over her shivering body, walked back into his study. and locked the door from the inside. 4,000 miles across the Atlantic Ocean, the Boeing 777 broke through a dense layer of low-hanging gray clouds. Below, the rugged, volcanic coastline of southwestern Iceland stretched into the steel-blue waters of the North Atlantic. Black basalt cliffs, jagged fields of moss-covered lava, and distant snow-capped glaciers appeared beneath the wing, like the surface of an unmapped planet. The wheels touched down on the runway of Keflavik International Airport with a firm, steady thud. In seat 24A, Audrey Cole adjusted the black woolen beanie over her ears and opened the window shade. She looked at the vast, desolate, beautiful horizon. Inside her mind, there was a strange, crystalline silence. When she woke up on the flight 3 hours ago, she had opened the small leather journal in her backpack. On the first page, written in her own neat, elegant handwriting, was a concise summary of her new reality. 1. Your name is Audrey Cole. You are 24 years old. 2. You have a degree in English literature and archive preservation. 3. You suffered a viral encephalitis event that permanently erased your childhood and early adult memories. Do not attempt to recover them. There is nothing there worth keeping. 4. You have 340,000 euros in an offshore trust account at Landsbanken. 5. You are free. Audrey closed the journal, slipped it into her pocket, and unbuckled her seatbelt. She walked through the arrivals gate, breathing in the crisp, biting sub-zero air that flowed through the glass terminal. It tasted of ocean salt, clean snow, and absolute stillness. She took the regional bus south toward Vik Mordal, a small coastal village of 300 residents nestled between black sand beaches and towering sea stacks. She had rented a small, timber-framed cottage on the edge of a lupin field, overlooking the ocean. The house had a stone fireplace, pine floorboards, and a large picture window that framed the crashing white surf of the Atlantic. On her first evening, Audrey unpacked her few belongings: 3 warm wool sweaters, 2 pairs of insulated boots, a sketchbook, and a set of professional graphite pencils. She built a fire in the hearth, watching the dry birch logs catch the flame, crackling with warm amber light. She boiled a pot of black tea, sat in the armchair by the window, and watched the twilight descend over the black sand beach. There were no ghosts in the corners of the room. There was no phantom pain in her temples. There was no memory of a man in a blood-stained white shirt, and no memory of cold needles piercing her skull. She took a sip of the hot tea, closed her eyes, and let out a long, effortless breath into the quiet room. For the first time in 5 years, Nora Sinclair did not exist, and Audrey Cole was completely at peace. While Audrey was learning the Icelandic names for the coastal birds, the empire of Dr. Julian Thorne was being incinerated in the public square. At 9 a.m. on a Tuesday morning, 30 federal agents from the Department of Justice and the Food and Drug Administration marched through the glass atrium of the Thorne Neurological Institute with heavy warrants. The whistleblowing package had been delivered simultaneously to the federal prosecutor's office, the New England Journal of Medicine, and 3 major international investigative news desks. It was not an anonymous tip. It was a masterfully compiled forensic archive containing high-resolution video recordings of all 18 extraction sessions, encrypted server logs with Julian's biometric authorization stamps, and raw cortical mapping data, demonstrating the illegal non-consensual extraction of neural tissue from a healthy human subject. Nora had scheduled the automated data dump before she ever stepped into the operating room for the final extraction. Dr. Julian Thorne? The lead federal marshal announced, kicking open the double doors of Julian's executive laboratory. Julian sat at his central workbench, surrounded by empty whiskey bottles, discarded blueprints, and rows of unwashed petri dishes. He didn't even look up from the high-resolution neural mapping model floating on his holographic display. Step away from the terminal, Mr. Thorne, the marshal ordered, his hand resting on his sidearm. You are under arrest for 18 counts of aggravated human experimentation, non-consensual biological harvesting, corporate fraud, and medical malpractice resulting in severe neurological injury. Julian didn't fight. He didn't reach for his lawyers. He simply stared at the holographic model of Nora's brain, a 3-dimensional cluster of glowing blue nodes representing the memory of their first kiss on the observation deck of the Empire State Building. Take whatever you want, Julian muttered, his voice barely audible beneath the hum of the cooling fans. Just leave the backup drive on server 4. Everything is being seized under federal asset forfeiture, the agent said, clicking heavy steel handcuffs around Julian's wrists. As they dragged him through the glass lobby, a wall of 400 journalists, television crews, and photographers swarmed the police barricades. Flashbulbs strobed in a blinding, relentless assault. Dr. Thorne, did you harvest your fiancé's memories to cure your mistress? Julian, is it true that Thorne Group stock has plummeted 85% in pre-market trading? Where is Nora Sinclair? Is she alive? Julian looked at the sea of flashing lenses, the microphones shoved into his face, the screaming reporters. He remembered what he had told Nora 2 months ago. Once summer is cured, I'll give you the grandest wedding. I want the whole world to know you're the woman I'd die for. Now the whole world knew his name, not as a pioneer of neuroscience, not as a brilliant savior, but as a butcher who carved up the mind of the woman who loved him to pay a debt to a parasite. 1 year after the raid, the Thorne Neurological Institute was a dark, boarded-up concrete shell in the medical district, its assets liquidated to pay multi-million-dollar federal penalties and civil damages. Julian had avoided maximum security prison through an insanity defense brokered by his family's trust attorneys, but the cost was total and permanent ruin. His medical license was revoked with prejudice across 48 countries. His patents were invalidated. He was stripped of every academic honor, every honorary doctorate, and barred from entering any research laboratory on Earth. He lived in a run-down, single-room brownstone apartment on the outskirts of the industrial docks. Every morning, the mail slot in his front door would click, dropping medical reports from the St. Jude Neuropsychiatric Hospice. Patient, Summer Brooks. Status, involuntary containment. Diagnosis, intractable synaptic graft encephalopathy with secondary psychotic mania. Summer's condition had deteriorated into permanent neurological chaos because Nora's memories contained the intense emotional energy of 18 years of authentic life, memories of Nora's dead mother baking bread, memories of high school art competitions, memories of falling in love in the rain. Summer's own identity had been completely colonized. She no longer answered to the name Summer. She spent 24 hours a day sitting on the floor of her padded room, screaming at the orderlies that she was Nora Sinclair, begging them to call Julian, and weeping because her husband was taking a knife to her head. Whenever Julian was forced by the court to visit her, Summer would crawl to the glass partition, press her gaunt, scabby face against the glass and whisper, "Julian, why did you steal my cherry blossoms? Why did you give me to this woman? It hurts. My brain is on fire." Julian would sit on the metal visitor's stool, his hands trembling in his coat pockets, unable to utter a single word. He was looking at the woman he had destroyed his life to save, and in her eyes, all he could see was the ghost of the woman he had murdered with his own hands. 2 years after landing in Iceland, Audrey Cole had become an integral part of the small community of Vic. She worked as the head archivist for the Regional Cultural Museum, cataloging historic maritime logs, folklore manuscripts, and geological surveys dating back to the 18th century. Her life was rich, quiet, and tactile. In the mornings, she would walk through the mist to the local bakery, buying fresh rye bread baked in the geothermal earth. In the afternoons, she would sit in the museum's glass conservatory, translating old Danish documents while sipping coffee with her colleagues. Her skin had regained a healthy, sun-kissed flush from mountain hikes. Her eyes were bright, clear, and unburdened by shadows. She had made friends, real friends who liked her for her quiet humor, her sharp intellect, and her gentle presence, with no expectations of sacrificial devotion. On a freezing Thursday in November, the first major blizzard of the season swept across the southern coast. Audrey stayed late at the museum, securing the historic map folios in the fireproof vault. When she finally locked the front door and stepped out onto the gravel lane, the wind was howling off the ocean, driving thick sheets of dry, powdery snow through the dark village. She pulled her heavy wool scarf over her nose, buttoned her shearling coat, and began the 10-minute walk along the coastal path toward her cottage. The village street lamps cast long, shimmering amber cones of light through the falling snow. As she rounded the bend near the historic black wooden church on the hill, she saw a figure standing on the roadside. A man. He wore a thin, soaked trench coat that was entirely inadequate for an Arctic blizzard. His shoulders were hunched against the freezing wind, his boots buried in 6 inches of fresh snow. He was shivering violently, his hands shoved deep into his pockets, his gaze fixed on the front gate of Audrey's cottage. Audrey slowed her pace, her brow furrowing in mild concern. In a small village where everyone knew everyone, a stranger standing in a blizzard was an immediate emergency. "Excuse me," Audrey called out in clear, fluent Icelandic. "Are you lost? The village guest house is 2 miles back toward the ring road." The man froze. He turned around slowly, his boots slipping in the icy gravel. The street lamp above them illuminated the man's face. He was 32 years old, but he looked 50. His face was gaunt, his cheekbones protruding sharply beneath paper-thin, sallow skin. His dark hair was matted with melting snow, and his eyes were wild, bloodshot, and hollowed out by 2 years of sleepless agony. Julian Thorne. He had spent 24 months and every remaining dollar of his hidden personal accounts hiring black market cyber investigators, tracking the encrypted digital handshake of the automated trust payments, until he finally pinpointed a tiny property registry in southern Iceland under the name Audrey Cole. He took 2 trembling steps toward her, his breath coming in ragged, steaming gasps. Nora. He choked out, his voice cracking into a dry, agonizing whistle. Nora, it's you. My God. It's really you. Audrey stopped 5 paces away. She looked at him. Her dark eyes scanned his disheveled coat, his trembling hands, the desperate, weeping expression on his face. There was no shock in her expression. No fear. No sudden flash of recovered memory. There was only the polite, guarded caution of a local resident encountering an unstable, freezing tourist on a dark country road. Sir, you have the wrong person, Audrey said calmly in English, switching languages effortlessly. My name is Audrey Cole. You are clearly suffering from hypothermia. Please come inside the church foyer. I can call the local rescue team to bring you dry clothes. Hearing her speak to him in that calm, sterile, stranger's tone struck Julian with the force of a physical sledgehammer. No, don't do this. Julian sobbed, dropping to his knees right therein. The freezing snow, his bare, chapped hands reaching toward her boots. Nora, please. Stop pretending. I know I was a monster. I know what I did to you. I lost everything. The clinic, my career, my family, my mind. He pulled a crushed, dirty red velvet box from his inner coat pocket and flipped it open with shaking, bleeding fingers. Inside, the 10-carat pink diamond ring caught the amber light of the street lamp, glittering like a shard of pink ice. Look at it. Julian wept, holding the ring up toward her like a dying man, begging for water. I kept it. I never gave it to her. I bought it for you. Nora, remember the cherry blossoms. Remember the dark alley. I took a knife to the shoulder for you. I bled for you under the trees. He tore open his coat, ripping his shirt buttons off to expose his left shoulder, pointing frantically at the jagged, faded surgical scar on his skin. Look at the scar. You cried when you saw it. You kissed it. You told me you would love me until the end of the world. Audrey looked down at the scar on his shoulder. She looked at the diamond in the velvet box. She looked at the man kneeling in the mud and snow, weeping until his forehead pressed against the freezing gravel at her feet. She felt no anger. She felt no lingering resentment. She felt no ancient buried ache in her chest. She felt the absolute, profound, and terrifying silence of a clean slate. Sir, Audrey said softly, her voice carrying over the sound of the ocean wind, like a cool, gentle bell. I don't know who Nora is. Julian's breath hitched in his throat. He slowly raised his tear-streaked face, staring up at her. I don't know what happened to your shoulder, Audrey continued, looking directly into his ruined, bloodshot eyes with gentle, unyielding clarity. And I don't know what promise you made to that woman. She stepped back 2 paces, clearing the distance between them, letting the falling snow drift down into the empty space between her boots and his kneeling frame. Whoever Nora was, Audrey whispered, she doesn't live here anymore. And whatever debt you owe her, she has already cleared the account. Nora, please, Julian gasped, his voice breaking into raw, jagged pieces. Just 1 second. Remember me for 1 second. Audrey looked at him with quiet pity. Go home, sir. It is far too cold to die on someone else's road. She turned on her heel, opened the wooden gate of her cottage, walked up the stone steps and stepped inside. The heavy timber door clicked shut. A moment later, the warm, amber glow of the fireplace illuminated the curtains of the front window, casting a rectangle of peaceful golden light onto the pristine falling snow. Outside in the dark, the blizzard howled with relentless Arctic fury. Julian Thorne stayed on his knees in the freezing slush for a long, agonizing hour. He looked at the closed timber door. He looked at the warm light in the window. He looked down at the diamond ring in his hand, a $10 million stone that could not buy back a single microsecond of a woman's memory. The realization settled into his bones with the freezing, irreversible finality of glacial ice. He had succeeded. He was the world's leading neuroscientist. His machine had functioned with flawless, surgical perfection. He had completely, irrevocably erased himself from the mind of the only person who had ever loved him. There was no grand reunion. There was no dramatic forgiveness. There was no second chance in Amalfi. He was not her enemy. He was not her abuser. He was not her lover. To Audrey Cole, Julian Thorne was nothing more than an inconvenient speck of dust blowing across an Icelandic highway. He let out a low, broken wail, a sound that was swallowed instantly by the roaring North Atlantic wind, dropped the diamond ring into the snow, and crawled away into the dark. 3 hours later, the blizzard passed. The clouds parted over the southern coast of Iceland, revealing a crystalline, sapphire-black sky dusted with millions of brilliant, diamond-bright stars. Audrey Cole stepped out onto the timber deck of her cottage, holding a warm, porcelain mug of spiced black tea. She leaned against the wooden railing, looking up at the sky. High above the black volcanic cliffs and the dark ocean surf, the aurora Borealis began to dance. Ribbons of emerald green, violet, and shimmering rose light rippled across the heavens like silk banners caught in a solar wind. The light reflected off the fresh white snow, bathing the entire world in an ethereal, breathtaking radiance. Audrey took a slow, deep breath of the freezing, pure air. Her mind was vast, clear, and quiet. Her past was a clean slate. Her present was warm and grounded. And her future was an infinite, unmapped horizon stretching out beneath the stars. She smiled, lifted her cup to the dancing lights in the sky, and drank the warmth of her own life.